the rim. Garnett on the slam. Oh, using Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot!
No smooth ad intro today, I just gotta get this out of the way first. Thanks to SeatGeek for sponsoring this video. SeatGeek is the amazing app that provides you with the easiest way to buy tickets for almost any kind of event, which would most likely be sports related for you all. The app pulls tickets from all over the web and has them in one place to make purchasing one for your event really easy, and it also assures you'll be getting the best value for your ticket. While searching for your tickets, each one is ranked with a score from 1 to 100 that lets you know if you're getting a good deal or not for your purchase. On top of that, the app also provides you with the detailed view of what you would see from your seat before you even get there, which is extremely helpful. If you're interested in downloading this app, the links will be in both the comment section and highlighted in the description. If you're still on the fence, consider using my promo code DOM2K to get $20 off your first purchase.
Back steal defending on James. LeBron with the step back. Stuffs. Shot clock to 5. James has to fire and scores!
Oh my!
What a shot by LeBron James, off balance, shot clock running down. He had no angle and he drilled it.
When a player with star expectations gets drafted, there generally aren't hopes of anything close to a championship for a while. There's hope that a championship is in the future, but the reason that a team was in position to draft that star in the first place is usually because their franchise has fallen on hard times that'll take more than one player to fix. Well, that is unless you've just potentially drafted the greatest player of all time. Age 22, 4th year in the league, no other superstar on the team, and James was quite literally doing the impossible by taking the Pistons on by himself, who'd been to the Eastern Conference Finals every year since 2004. That's not to discredit his teammates, but considering he'd go on to score the final 25 points for the Cavaliers, it's actually factual for once to say he was the whole team, at least for the end of the game. There's just so much about this performance that adds to his case for GOAT. For one, had the Cavs had lost Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals to the Pistons, it's highly unlikely they would have won 2 straight, including a Game 7 on Detroit's home floor to go to the finals. To follow that up, this was only his second postseason, and once this game was done, he'd officially posted one of the greatest playoff performances in NBA history. And finally, to this point, James had already proved himself in the postseason considering what was reasonably expected of this roster. In 2006, they came within 1 game of the Eastern Conference Finals. And in 2007, shortly after this gargantuan 48-point, 9-rebound, and 7-assist performance to barely pull out a 2-point victory, he had propelled this team to their first NBA Finals berth, and make no mistake about it, this was way ahead of schedule. All within 4 short seasons, they'd gone from a 17-win team that hadn't seen the playoffs since the end of the 90s to a 50-win team in the NBA Finals. Not bad considering management really didn't help the situation, and that his very first pack of teammates were downing him, saying a high school kid wasn't going to be their savior. But then reality set in, and the story that would eventually work against LeBron's case for GOAT was officially set in motion. The 2007 NBA Finals were one of the lowest rated in history, and it was for a couple of reasons. A, the stereotype around the Spurs being boring was heavily present back then, but it was also because everybody understood that the Cavs had no chance. Even the Cavs knew the Cavs didn't have a chance based on the body language in this huddle.
Everybody got to do it. Every single body is 12 minutes. You either advance or you go home. 12 minutes. Advance or go home. What do we want to do? What do we want to do?
They were swept, and with LeBron happily obliging to take the open threes the Spurs gave him, he turned in what was easily the worst series in his young playoff career. But even today, over 11 years later, people generally excuse their series, saying that any star with the roster he had would have been swept by the Spurs as well. That's hard to disagree with, but the important aspect of that series for his case is that it raised the stakes even higher. No longer was LeBron just this amazing kid from high school that was trailblazing the league. He'd now been legitimized as a championship contender, and that label would remain for the rest of his career as we know it today. That was both a positive and a negative. On one hand, you had this kid that had gotten so good so quickly that people were now totally into the LeBron James story being written on his pursuit of Jordan. On the other, by constantly keeping an average roster in title contentions, he was denying them the chance to pick high in the draft, which meant his teams were quite literally playing out of their league all the time, and they were never going to be as successful as people wanted. That lack of success fell square on LeBron's shoulders as much as the actual success did, and that wound up having a profound effect on his future decisions. The youngest player to lead his team in points per game and to win Rookie of the Year. the youngest player to score 1 through 5,000 points and to score 2,000 points in a season, the youngest player to record a triple-double and average 30 points a game in a season. Those are all amazing credentials to go on the all-time resume that's being built here, but for the new phase LeBron's career was entering, these stats began to mean less and less, which is how everyone became so bored with his greatness. After that first finals appearance, the magic question was starting to become, how long until he wins a championship? We know he's going to be a top 5 player in the league every year, we know he's capable of an MVP, we know he's capable of making a deep playoff run, but because of the standards that he's set, he needs to win soon. And that's where his career entered a cycle where he began to suffer from his own success. The 2008 campaign was practically over before it even begun, or at least that's what it seemed. The Cavs actually regressed to 45 wins, but the more important thing that happened came before the season when the Boston Celtics assembled the Big Three. Meanwhile, the biggest moves the Cavs management made was to acquire an over-the-hill Ben Wallace. This Celtics team would play a crucial part in the evolution of his own career, but for now, they were most people's pick to dominate and win the title. There was no way a team with one star could challenge them, or at least there shouldn't have been a way.
Smith's screen, Posey will defend. Oh! LeBron James, with no regard for human life, has given the Cavaliers their biggest lead tonight.
This Cavs team had failed to capitalize on their own success over the past few years, and yet, here they were in a 1-point game against a heavily favored trio in Boston. While it's true that LeBron was shooting poorly in the series overall, here he was again putting on another all-time performance to possibly drag his inferior team past Goliath. Seeing a pattern here? The superhuman series against the Wizards, Game 5 against the Pistons, and now in a Game 7 at Boston, he was on his way to posting an efficient 45 points, 6 assists, and 8 rebounds while playing 46 of a possible 48 minutes. Is it even possible to have played better in back-to-back years against championship caliber teams? Unfortunately, there would be no vindication this time. A few plays went Boston's way in crucial moments, and they just barely escaped LeBron's onslaught by virtue of Pierce matching him shot for shot with 41 points. Just think about that. After nearly dethroning the Pistons in 06 and actually beating them in 07, his third playoff act nearly led to him taking down the team responsible for popularizing modern-day super teams. There are no rewards for losing, but it's worth mentioning that he was doing this with, again, no significant help from management. To be the best, it's generally accepted that you've got to beat the best, and Kobe and LeBron were both in the same conversation with Jordan at this time. For a while, people looked at Kobe as the closest thing to Michael, and he'd more than done his part in capturing 3 titles already. But for his story to continue to be written, and for him to ever actually catch Jordan, not only did he need more titles, but he needed to win his first without Shaq. This was going on at the same time that LeBron was officially challenging for the title of the best player in the league, while also being in the very early stages of his own pursuit of Jordan. He'd now had 4 years of incredible playoff runs, but none of them had come close to actually bringing him a title. That's when 2 important things changed. 1. Boston practically dethroned themselves when Kevin Garnett sustained a season-ending knee injury. With that event, and the destruction of the Pistons through trade, there was thought to no longer be an Eastern Conference team that was superior to the Cavs, thanks in large part to them winning 66 games claiming the first seed, and to James finally winning his first MVP award. That's what made everything real. The MVP, along with the best record in the league, took him from being a great player trying to prove himself to an expected champion. Gone were the days where his teams were perceived to be an upstart trudging through tougher competition. Now they were the tougher competition, and that's precisely the moment he began to suffer from his own success. With Kobe Bryant being the 2008 MVP and the best player in the league to many, at the same time as LeBron being the new MVP only 1 year removed from his last finals appearance, this was going to settle it. The 2 best players in the NBA were going to clash in an epic battle of titans to prove who was the best, and to prove who deserved to continue their pursuit of Jordan. There was no hindsight at the time, so there was no excuses about one roster being superior to the other. The Cavs had acquired Mo Williams, who'd make the All-Star team and appeared to be the help LeBron needed to get over the hump. Both seemed like legitimate teams, and now the only thing left to do was play. LeBron's regular season stats were pretty consistent with how dominant they'd been, but as soon as the playoffs started, it's like he turned on another gear. He absolutely decimated what was left of Detroit after the trade, posting an insane 32, 11, and 7 on 50% shooting in what actually seemed like his peak at the time. It's well known now that he improved later on, but it's hard to argue he was ever more of a freak athlete than at this time. He continued his playoff domination by dragging the Hawks for 4 games, where he upped his efficiency to 55% and even shot 48% from 3 while averaging 33 points, and again, visually looking like something no one had ever seen before. So undefeated through 2 rounds and playing superhuman level basketball, along with the injured Celtics being disposed of by the Magic, there was absolutely nothing standing in the way of Judgment Day. LeBron James, playing at the highest level of his career to that point, was going to meet a possessed Kobe Bryant looking to prove he could win without Shaq, and we were going to have definite answers to some very tough questions about the GOAT conversation. And for exactly 2 quarters in the 2009 Eastern Conference Finals, that's exactly what was going to happen.
Scored 16 points. Our triple team rejected by James. Our questions, why no foul? James for 3. Yes! What a display being put on here by LeBron.
Who are the Orlando Magic, and what have you done with the actual contender in this conference? That's what the first 2 quarters looked like, and for that short amount of time, a Lakers and Cavaliers finals had never looked more certain. LeBron was absolutely obliterating the competition just as he had in the first 2 rounds, and there wasn't an ounce of the Magic that was prepared to get in the way. And then reality set in the same way it did when the Spurs swept them in 07, and the same way it did 1 year earlier in Boston when just a few plays decided the entire series. The reality, although nobody recognized it at the time, was that the regular season success LeBron could propel that team to was always going to hurt him in the long run. Winning 66 games and the MVP, while posting 48 points and 8 assists in the first game of this series, was never going to change that there were just more structurally sound teams he was always going to have to face. They could run teams out of the building during the regular season. They could become everyone's favorite, and LeBron could look as if he had no equal. But in the postseason, when teams had time to exploit their strengths and learn their weaknesses, they were going to win the war, and LeBron's resume was going to take the hit. He nearly averaged an efficient 40-point triple-double against the Magic that series, and that was only enough to stretch it to 6 games. 10 years later, that epic performance goes in his case to be the greatest ever because it's well understood that he pushed that roster far past its limits. But 10 years ago, that was the official beginning to the question, just how real is this LeBron James story we're being sold? When he came out of high school, the world was his. He was the greatest ever for his age. He was supposed to be the new Michael. But here lies a pattern where he dominates the regular season only to fail to finish the job by leading his team to the crown. And this particular failure has cost the world a chance to put him head to head with the player we've been comparing to Jordan for years. And if that's how we felt in 2009, then 2010 did absolutely nothing to help him.
So you guys got Shaq, Orlando got Vince Carter, Boston has a healthy Kevin Garnett coming back. Why are you guys the favorite to come out of the East?
Why are we?
2010 would be a virtual copy and paste of 2009 for both management and LeBron James. The Cavs made another signing that ultimately wouldn't mean much in Shaquille O'Neal, although it was technically their biggest addition of the LeBron James era, which says a lot. LeBron looked amazing as usual, posting identical stats and heavily challenging Kobe for the best player in the league. The Cavaliers looked amazing, notching another 61 wins, and the Celtics, who were thought to be LeBron's true challenge in the East, looked too old and slow most of the year to make a run. So for another year, everybody fell for it because they thought the Shaq signing would be the difference. Sure, they'd lost to the Magic the year before, but they're better now, especially after making a late season deal for versatile forward Antoine Jamison. The subplot there being that they could have traded for Amari Stoudemire. Way to go, management. And LeBron is also working on his second straight MVP. This has to be the year. It has to be it because he's also a free agent when it's over, and if he doesn't do it now, there's a serious chance he might give up on Cleveland. His averages for the first 7 years in Cleveland are some of the best all-around stats anyone has ever posted. His playoff resume is even better. Not only are his stats still perfect, but they've had substance on the court. And by many accounts, especially by the time he'd won that first MVP, he'd become the best player in the game within his first 5 seasons of being an NBA player. What did management offer to supplement that? Larry Hughes, Mo Williams, Antoine Jamison, and an over-the-mountain Shaquille O'Neal. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that for those 2 years that he was winning MVP, he was also being plastered as a failure because he couldn't pull a team over the hump whose success relied almost solely on him. That's literally how it was from the time he was drafted, and the minute his team started winning, media became overzealous and called them favorites. They were the favorites over the Orlando Magic, completely ignoring the fact that they had the best center in the game surrounded by sharpshooters. They were the favorites over Boston, even though anybody should have been able to see what the Celtics' depth was going to do for that series. And it's funny because during that season, I had an intense rivalry going on with my dad, who was a Lebron fan. He swore up and down, just like the media, that it was Cleveland's year and that the sun had finally set on Boston's time at the top. I went as far as to print a poster for my door saying that the Cavaliers wouldn't get past Boston in the playoffs because they simply weren't deep enough. The Celtics came into the playoffs a 4th seed, meanwhile Cleveland came in first again with the MVP, so I was on my own with that take. But not too much later, what I said had come to pass. For the 5th year in a row and the 2nd year with legitimate championship expectations, to the public, LeBron James had again failed to finish what he started. This time it was magnified by the fact that he was A, going to be a free agent, and B, accused by many of quitting during Game 5 when the series was tied. From the book called The Soul of Basketball, there's a quote from Doc Rivers talking about when LeBron realized that series was over. It reads, quote, "You could see he knew he didn't have enough. There was one play where we scored. He looks around a little bit with his arms held out, mouth agape, eyes blank, and he's right in front of our bench. He looked around like, what the fuck? Who the fuck do I have on this team?" I turned to Kevin and said, "Got him. We got him." That refers to LeBron realizing he was facing the big three that were really more like the big four by that point with Rondo, and they were about 11 useful players deep. Rasheed Wallace, Nate Robinson, Glenn Davis, Tony Allen. That was about as good a team that could be built around a core, and that was precisely what I was referring to when I was the only one saying that Cleveland wouldn't be able to hang despite the rest of the world declaring them favorites. At that moment, when the Celtics had made their second finals in 3 years, it looked like they weren't going anywhere anytime soon. And that's also the moment that likely drove the nail in the coffin for LeBron's next move. The general expectations since he'd been drafted had been met, but they were still rising. The better his teams did, the more he was expected to succeed. And despite the obvious gaps management wasn't filling in, every single failure, including this one against Boston where he turned in another great series statistically, was counted against him and his legacy. Now all of a sudden people were looking at him as a potential choker. Meanwhile, Kobe went on to claim his second straight title and Finals MVP, being able to hold that over the fact that despite being a favorite, LeBron hadn't even been able to get back to the finals since 07. His first 7 years in Cleveland had already established him as one of the NBA's all-time greats, which is really their importance to his case for the greatest of all time. How many of today's players or players in recent memory can you say became the league's best in their first 5 to 7 years of playing? However, he was officially moving on to another phase of his career. The part where it didn't matter how many MVPs he won, how many All-NBA teams he made, how many 60-win seasons he had, none of it mattered. Jordan had won a title in his 7th year in the league. Kobe had managed to be a huge part of 3 by the time he was only 6 years in. So then if LeBron wasn't going to bring in a title soon, then in the eyes of the public, what use would anyone have for him in this conversation? And that's when he made both the best and worst decision of his career.
The answer to the question everybody wants to know. LeBron, what's your decision?